Hello, and welcome to another episode of Time to Talk Titanic. So, I'm excited to get into this one because we have some people on this time who, in fact, we have three. We have three people on this time who were not on the previous episode. And so, what I'm going to do initially is I'm going to go through those three mystery guests who are the other co-hosts that you're yet to meet. And in no particular order, we will start with Presley. So, Presley, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, it can be as brief or as in-depth as you like, but just kind of let us know, what got you into Titanic, do you do anything Titanic related? So yeah, I'll just kind of hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Cool. Hi, I'm Presley. I am in the US. I've loved Titanic since I was like 9. I started playing the violin because I wanted to learn Near My God to Thee like Wallace Hartley. So I'm classically trained. I was a violin major for a little while, and everyone was always like, "Oh my gosh, that's such a weird story." that I started playing the violin because of the Titanic.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
yeah.
That's amazing. So, and so how long has that been for?
It's been 12 years.
12 years. Wow. I don't think there's any hobby I've like stuck to for that long. So, kudos for not only like learning it, but like 12 years. That's incredible. And so it was kind of the story of Wallace Hartley and the ship's band that inspired you to do that.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Little 9-year-old me, too. Like, what 9-year-old is like, ooh, I know what I'm going to do?
I feel like anyone listening to this, when you say like what 9-year-old is, there will be so many people that are like this 9-year-old, or like when I was 9, because one of the common themes that I think for anyone, either it's out of us or just any kind of Titanic enthusiast, the passion kind of, for reasons sometimes unknown, started from a very young age, and it kind of imprints on many different aspects of your life. So it's really interesting to hear that you took up a very particular hobby and skill based on the Titanic tragedy. So that's incredible. Wow. So yeah, thank you very much. We shall move on now. I'm just kind of going up the way. So above you, Presley, on my screen, we have David. Hello, David. A little intro about yourself.
Yeah, I don't really like talking about myself, but I guess I will do it. Hi, I'm David. It's hard to remember what got me into Titanic. I assume it's the '97 movie, like most other people. And at the time, I was just a child. I thought it looked cool, and then just dived right into it head first, reading about everyone and everything Titanic. And then I've been on and off it, but then starting last year, I've definitely gotten right back into it, and it's here to stay.
Brilliant. I love it. So you don't just kind of consume media, do you do quite a lot of reading?
Anything I can find. Um, I study digital film production at uni, and we had to do an essay about a cultural idea. And I decided, hey, why not try doing the Titanic movies as an essay, just because I could, and just supplemented reading material through that. Just anytime I
Brilliant.
can, really.
Because I find for myself, you say that you write essays, and I kind of do that as well. Not so much for like courses or, like university. I just do it for fun. Um, you could say I'm a nerd, and you'd be right. Um, But funnily enough, I don't do a lot of reading. I won't even admit to how many books I've read in my life because it's not a lot. But I think nowadays people actually underestimate how much reading they do because we read online a lot. So when I think of all the
Yeah.
kind of stuff that I've learned about Titanic, okay, a lot of it has also been listening to documentaries or watching documentaries. But I feel like I've also done quite a lot of reading. And there are some people that have, bookcases full of books on the subject of Titanic, and they've read them all. They might have read them all multiple times. Um, and I almost felt like a bit of a sham because I hadn't read so much about the Titanic. And there's so much, so it's like, where do you begin? But definitely, before we hit record, we were mentioning On a Sea of Glass. And
Yeah.
that, I feel like it was released, I believe, in 2012. And it has kind of become like the holy grail for, a written piece on the Titanic tragedy. It covers a lot, and it does it very well. And yeah, but yeah, I love the fact that the Titanic has inspired you to write essays. And if you were able to share it, just privately, I'd love to read it. If you still had it, I'd enjoy that quite a lot. So moving on, we have Callum. Hello, Callum.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize I was supposed to go on there. Hi, I'm doing fine, thank you. Yeah, it's thank you very much for having me on.
No problem at all. So, any just little intro about yourself? How long have you been interested in the Titanic? Do you remember what it was that got you interested in it?
Yeah, so I'm a history teacher from London. I moved here a couple of years ago during pandemic, great times, and really the thing that got me into Titanic, I'd say, was obviously the '97 movie. I think a lot of people can probably trace that, but I became obsessed afterwards. I remember raiding my local library when those used to exist in this country. Um, of every single Titanic book I could get my hands on. And within a couple of weeks, I'd managed to read the very limited selection they had. And I was just obsessed from that point onwards. I went on to do it for my dissertation, for my undergrad. So it's stayed with me throughout my life. And it's lovely to see how much of a community really is being built from Titanic now online.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it is a nice, maybe not so much a segue, but just a nod, just a little nod to kind of what we're doing here. And I touched on it very briefly in the last episode, just in the intro, basically just exactly like what you've said, that the Titanic tragedy has really carried on forward into the modern day, and it has built such a huge community. And there's so many little kind of subsections of that community. You have artists, you've got writers, you've got historians and researchers, um, people that are even just into one of the Titanic films or all of them. They might not read, they might not even know much about the the true historical event, but they just love the all the cinema that there is about it and all the media that there is to consume. So and yeah, so I like what we've got here, because I feel like we have a very good kind of broad selection of the community being represented, which is nice. And again, we've got someone that wrote like a dissertation based on the Titanic, so we love to hear it. And now I'm going to say hello to Dean, who was on the last episode. How are you, Dean?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm glad I behaved enough on the last one to be invited back, so that's nice.
Absolutely. Wouldn't do it without you. I feel like, I didn't set like many ground rules, which probably now it's like anything's like fair game. So I'll just kind of be making rules as I go. So far, there are none, which has been fun. So yeah, don't feel like you need to like filter yourself. Don't feel like you need to, just be yourself. That's kind of, I think, what we learned from the last one, because it was a really, really good time, and I'm sure this will be too. Now, on to Chandler. Hello, Chandler. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thank you. Lovely to be back. Yeah. It's a nice day.
It's a lovely day. And Sebastian, hello. How are you?
Hello.
Hello. How's your IKEA furniture?
Well, we currently just built the bed, so
Brilliant. I don't know if it was real, but I saw a post on online, and it was a bar of chocolate, and it had IKEA paper on it, and it said a flat pack Easter egg.
I would like that to be true.
yeah.
If not IKEA, get on that.
Yeah, if that's not real, they're missing a trick. Like it was so funny. I was like, that's just fantastic. I now feel like I need to go to the big IKEA in Edinburgh just to see if it's true. So yeah, I think this is us. But do you know what? What a brilliant turnout. Um, for something that Louis and he can't be here today. He's picking up
Aw.
his parents, who I believe are on their honeymoon, are coming back from their
Ooh.
honeymoon from the airport. So he's
Ooh.
being an obedient child. And yeah, but he and I started this 2 years ago now, and kind of took a little breaks. But we kind of wanted to figure out what we wanted it to be. And I kind of carried the torch for a while, but I thought I wanted to do something different, and I think this is it. Really tapping into that communal aspect of this interest, of Titanic. Um, and I think where I kind of the launch pad that I want to kind of start off on tonight. Again, we were discussing it very briefly just before we hit record. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything too spicy. We'll fill you all in. Basically, what we were kind of saying was, obviously, with the 110th anniversary right now, really, it's the 16th of April. So very much still kind of in the midst of it. One of the big events over the weekend was the live streams, the real-time syncings, which really kind of blew up when Honor and Glory did theirs a few years ago. It was on, definitely here in Britain, it was all over the news. It went surprisingly viral. It went super viral because it wasn't even like it was around like the 100th anniversary, because I think it was quite a bit after that. But I think just because it was like nothing anyone had seen, this very long YouTube video of this horrific event that they had seen in a very dramatic fashion in films and TV, but watching the real-time syncing was just very eerie. And there's this sense of, you're watching it in real time and you want to reach out and tell them what they could do differently. And even when you're watching the collision, you just, every time you still think, they might miss it, they might turn just in time. And it really just captured people, and it's blown up. There are so many people that do them now, and they're all different and they're all great in their own ways. But where I wanted to jump off in this episode was, how did we spend the 110th anniversary? And yeah, I'd like to kind of just go through everyone and kind of give everyone a chance to kind of say, because me personally, I'll start. I did nothing Titanic related. I got wasted in Dublin.
I'm on that, Aaron. I'm on that too.
Honestly, I woke up in like a gutter. I didn't really, but I might as well have. I was rat-arsed. I was out my face. But it was fun. It was great. But do you know what? I was in Ireland and I was like, this is, every gift shop had something Titanic related. So I was like, that'll do.
It was an Irish gutter.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I'm kind of doing something Titanic related, I guess. And I posted some drawings on the 14th. So I was like, I've done my bit. But yeah, is there anyone that kind of wants to? Well, actually, to begin with, who watched any real-time syncing live streams, and which one did you watch?
I haven't watched them yet.
I haven't watched them in full. I've watched a bit of them, like around the syncing and bits and bobs here and there, but none in full.
Yeah,
Right, okay.
I've been dipping in and out. I
Yeah.
started with the Honor and Glory one, and then I discovered that Ken Marshall was on the Part-Time Explorer one.
I was
So
surprised at that.
Yeah, it was quite
It
shocking.
was,
So
it was like a nice little surprise.
Yeah, I wanted to listen to that as well to see. So I'm dipping in between the two, but because they were doing it Titanic time, that was like what 3-4 o'clock in the morning here in the UK. So
Yeah, it's the same here. Yeah. I think they're going from normal Atlantic time, but yeah.
I was not expecting that, because obviously I knew that they would both be doing their real-time live streams. But when I heard that Ken had appeared, because that kind of became like the chat afterwards, so you'll probably find that the historical FX one may potentially get a lot more views initially because of that, after the fact. But
that one definitely had the bigger names to it, didn't it?
Oh, totally. Just so incredible to be able to say that you had Ken Marshall, join your live stream. And of course, he wrote the foreword for the authors who wrote On a Sea of Glass, their new book, recreating Titanic and her sisters. Ken wrote the foreword for that. So I guess having him on not only to commemorate the 110th anniversary, but also to kind of promote the new book. So yeah, absolutely, well done them. That's just amazing. So I'm really looking forward to retroactively going back and watching the Odyssey of Glass live stream. Did anyone else check out any of the live streams?
Yeah,
I was. Oh, actually, do you want to go first?
Sorry, I did. And I was, because it was U.S. time, so it was like 8 o'clock here, so it was good. And everyone was so excited about having Ken. He's kind of like a celebrity within the Titanic community. And Historic
He's the
Travels,
top brass.
yeah, and Historic Travels did something too, and I tuned into that a little bit.
Yeah.
I love Historic Travels. I think Sam is so adorable, isn't he? He's just so adorable. I love watching his videos. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I don't know if that's me being weird, but I just think he's adorable.
Yeah, Sam, he must be protected at all costs.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Is he the one with the models who always holds up the models when he talks about the ship?
Yes,
bless him.
He's just wonderful. Like Sam, if you're watching this, we love you. I think so. He sounds it.
Y'all need to get on that.
But so really looking forward to checking that one out. But I think this just kind of shows that 110 years on, we're all clearly still gripped with this, and it's not showing any signs of slowing.
That guy.
And I feel like, if anything, because of advancements in technology, the fact that a team like Honor and Glory can be promising us, in X amount of time, you will be able to walk around the Titanic as if she was, in Southampton or on the open sea. Like, that's just incredible. That's something that 10, 20 years ago you'd have only been able to dream of. And even then, it would have been hard because we didn't know what a lot of the rooms looked like. Whereas now, we're very lucky in terms of this generation of Titanic enthusiasts that there are so many rooms that before were just so unknown. And now, we can go into Google or we can go into the Honor and Glory YouTube page and we can see them. So I feel like as it's going on, the story is not only going to continue to live, but it will live on in new and very interesting ways, and maybe some ways that we can't even think of right now. Virtual reality Titanic, that is the dream. That's my dream.
Well, isn't that already something you can do? I think they've made it for like VR, but that's like the ultimate thing. You like put on the goggles and then you're like, oh damn, I'm here.
We have there's what was it, Titanic VR, that game? There's I have it on PlayStation, and I have a PlayStation VR. Yeah, I did the whole sinking experience in VR. I mean, it's truncated to like 20 minutes, but
is that the game where they have like the sinking and then you go and diving to the wreck later?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so
yes, because I've seen the gameplay and I was like, there was a lot of details they included. Really nice.
It's really cool, and just doing the sinking, because you start off on the boat deck like in VR, and you go on the lifeboat, and then you row away and see it sink. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I cried afterwards because it was just so emotional being in there with the surround sound, the VR, and everything. It was,
and the dialogue
it's hard
as
to describe. Yeah,
it's really well written.
Yeah, there was one bit where you're going down on a lifeboat and you pass a porthole and there's someone inside banging saying, "Please help me!" And just seeing that in 3D, it was. I'm getting shivers just thinking about it right now.
Wow. Now, I have an announcement to make.
Oh no!
So we have just had Nathan, one of our co-hosts, join.
Welcome.
Hello, Nathan. How are you?
I'm lovely. I just woke up.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Time zones.
Welcome to the podcast. If you're awake enough, or if you want, you can just like groan and roll back over and we'll just move on. If you'd like, you can give a little introduction. We've already done them. But of course, with the kind of format of the podcast, which I like, it's pretty informal. People can kind of join when they want. People can leave when they have to. But yeah, Nathaniel, if you want to give a little kind of intro about yourself, what got you into Titanic? Do you have any kind of Titanic related hobbies? So yeah, fire away.
Oh, all right. Well, my name is Nathan. I am from Arizona, and I got into Titanic around probably like 97, 98. It was originally the movie that got me into Titanic, and since then, I've done a lot of drawing inspired from Titanic. Uh, but since then, I would say a lot of my time is spent working with like models of the Titanic. I have 3 very large models, and yeah, I've had the interest for a good 20 years almost, and it's still growing.
And you were fortunate enough to get one of the big, massive Lego Titanics.
Yes, it's huge. It's the largest Lego set ever made.
Oh, I'm so envious.
So when I saw that Nathan had that, I was like so happy. It was just like, it was great. And also I'm kind of loving like vicariously through him. So whenever he would like post about it or send me photo updates, it was just like awesome. I just loved it. So yeah. Models, it's something I love, but I don't have the patience for. And like I said last time, I barely have the patience to do my own drawings. So one hobby at a time. One hobby at a time. So yeah, thank you, Nathan, and I'm so glad you could join. And if we lull you back to sleep, that's fine. So okay, yeah. So we were kind of talking about the live streams, the real time syncings. We got into a bit of Titanic VR, which I love. I always see complaints on the comments of those videos because people are like, "Oh, it's not accurate." Like the wreck kind of visual aspect of it isn't like 100% accurate. And I'm like, well, did you expect them to map out every single rusticle?
Yeah, there's only so much you can do.
And I think there's still part
of
of the rig that's unexplored. So
exactly, I think they look pretty good, and I've even seen people share like kind of screen grabs, thinking that they are photos of the wreck. So they clearly do the job, and I find with my art a lot of the time, sometimes I'm not going for, or with the drawings I've released anyway, I'm not going for 1,000,000% accuracy. A lot of it is to convey the atmosphere or a mood. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not like making it up as I go, but I won't go into it with. So, for instance, there's a drawing I did of 3 portholes going under, and technically the center porthole would have been a hallway. But I didn't want to draw a hallway because I was like, that's boring. I want to draw a room. I want to draw like gold furniture and wallpaper. So little things like that,
Well, I know what you're saying, but artist to artist, with doing trains, railway enthusiasts, they're very nitpicky with the tiniest detail. So I always have a little bit of creative liberty with what I do because I'm like, I can't do like a picturesque or like a picture perfect drawing. It's gonna have flaws here and there, but it's trying to get as close as possible, or doing what you're trying to do with this drawing, because I've been working a lot with atmosphere over the last few years instead of just drawing a motive. Just having atmosphere, because when you look at the drawing afterwards, and especially with your Titanic drawings, you're like thrown into them because it's art, so it's like not a real picture or anything, but you have the emotion, you have the expressions on the people's faces and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's far more important than getting every single rivet right, because that's impossible unless you're like Ken Marshall or something.
Oh, no, exactly. Yeah, completely. And I think as well, when, we kind of mentioned all the different facets of the Titanic community, you're going to have those people that are sticklers for 100% accuracy, and that's totally fine.
And they'll settle for no less.
Yeah. And because a lot of the time it's those people who have the truth of certain matters rising to the top, which is good. They're able to kind of cut through a lot of the noise and be quite vocal. Of course, like we said last time, there's a way to be vocal, be nice. But when we're speaking of accuracy, we had kind of mentioned something on our group chat I know, listeners, we have a group chat. This is like a club. And
And it's not like you're missing everything because there's nothing PG in there, so you're not missing out.
yeah, it's a club, and luckily
Yeah.
you're not invited.
A lot of inside jokes.
Yeah. But one thing I thought was really, really interesting was there was a screenshot which I think was from the On a Sea of Glass real-time live stream
Yes, that's the one I see, I think.
of the vertical or the stern sinking.
Yes, that was a surprise to me because I'm always watching the sinking moment because there might be something new they add into it. Like I mentioned on the last podcast, that like the double break, and this time that was like different in a way because they didn't do like, I think they did a low angle sinking on the last one, and then this one they sort of brought back the theory of the bow being like pulled up. I'm forgetting the terminology of the front end was pulling the back end up, and it goes
Yes,
vertical.
the bow almost being attached to the very kind of the keel.
Yeah, because they mentioned something where I was like, oh no, we're going back to the banana theory.
Bloody banana.
That's entertainment in itself, like watching James Cameron just throwing out theories in the room, and those historians with like 30 years experience just look at him like, what are you on about?
Oh yeah, that was the video where he was like, if you
what if we like go to the Californian? Like, what if we just do that?
Yeah, put Titanic in reverse and like sail to, and the people looking, they're just like, okay, Jim, okay. It was very much like that. Okay, Grandpa, let's get you back to the home.
Yeah. You've been away from the nursery for too long.
Get back to your Avatar. Get back to Avatar.
But it's super interesting because I can't remember exactly how the On a Sea of Glass real time was last year or the year before that, whenever the last one was. But yeah, there's always going to be little variations, whether that's because they want to kind of go down the Honor and Glory route, and I don't think the On a Sea of Glass team will do this per se. I feel like, so Honor and Glory obviously did their real time, which was a bit more creative license. It was more inspired by Charles Joffin's account.
Was that
with the stern just rolled over, how do we nap, and down it went. But and then obviously On a Sea of Glass this year, they had the stern going more vertical. Obviously, it wasn't completely straight. It wasn't like James Cameron's 97 depiction. But then even James Cameron, when he did the final word, his animation, the stern did seem more. In fact, the National Geographic magazine cover, which was kind of, I think, promoting that, it's the illustration of Titanic, and you can see under the waterline, and you can see the bow kind of planing away, and the stern has almost rolled onto its side. So it's interesting that even James Cameron knew that what he had shown, whilst for the time it was good, and he was working with what he had, clearly if he had the budget to make Titanic all over again, he would have the stern go in a more violent fashion, which I like. I think personally, the reason I started talking about this was we're talking about accuracy, and it all comes down to that. I think last time we established that ships, they don't go down in a very beautiful way. It's not meant to be handsome.
No, I mean, the amount of YouTube videos I watch where it's like sinking ships caught on camera, and like 9 out of 10 of them always roll to the side at some point.
They all do normally.
Yeah,
I think
Titanic still was the perfect sinking in a lot of ways, and they even said that in the Sea of Glass stream. It's like, you really don't have sinkings like that where you have like hours to prepare the lifeboats and put them in the water. It often just like what is Empress of Ireland or something that's like 14 minutes. Lusitania is like 17 thereabout minutes, and then you have Titanic that's like 2 hours, and it's like, that's perfect in a way.
I love that you mentioned Empress of Ireland, and Chandler's like, yes.
On the note of the Empress of Ireland, we're coming up on a really exciting anniversary quite soon, which I'm just so excited to share that with you all later.
Oh dear.
No,
Oh
on the
no,
note
don't
actually
don't
of
leave us in suspense. Share now.
oh no, it's we just have to wait for it for when it's actually the time. No,
Spill the
on the note
beans.
of it rolling to the side, I'm going to throw out again. So you know how I've got the toy that breaks in half.
Mm-hmm.
Every time it sinks, so it breaks in half, and the stern portion always rolls on its side every single time, and you can't make it do anything else, which is really interesting because
That is interesting,
that's
and it just shows you. I think it almost makes sense because people think, oh, well, having the big boilers in the stern, of course it was going to sink like that, but no, because we don't know if it broke evenly. Because what would happen? Because again, we don't know if the hull and the superstructure on one side just completely tore open, but on the other side it actually kind of stayed together a little bit for whatever reason. So that would mean you had water gushing into one side of the ship and not the other. So there's all these factors that play that we just don't know about. But and actually, Chandler, funnily enough, in the Final Word documentary, I'm sure it's that one. They use it's slightly bigger, but it's a model very much like that, and it
yeah.
kind of detonates and it splits. And they established that the stern just wouldn't have stayed upright. That it would have, there would have been some rolling over, of varying degrees, but that it wouldn't have completely rolled over. But yeah, that it just wouldn't have sank in the way that he showed. But I love it, and so I think we've possibly already answered my next question and what I kind of want to discuss in this episode. But I'd be curious to go through kind of each of you and see what your take is on this. We've just had the 110th anniversary. We've just spoken for the last 30 odd minutes about Titanic. Obviously, I hope so.
As we do.
As we do on this podcast. And I would just kind of like to hear why you think, 110 years on, your personal kind of take on either for you or just generally why you think it still sticks around. Why do we still talk about it? Why are we all still so invested in it? Even just the casual observer, they know, even if they don't know the exact dates, when they see it on the news, like, the 110th anniversary, they'll be like, oh, and they'll know something about the Titanic. So we'll start on the bottom of my screen, the list. Nathan, if you're still with us,
am.
why do you think the story is just so lasting 110 years on?
Well, I think personally for me, it's always been about the ship. And the way that I see it is there's a lot of different aspects about the ship that are just, it seems like a modern ship, even though it was like 110 years ago. But there's sometimes when I'm just looking at different parts of the ship where it can be kind of out of time. It's like luxurious, obviously, but it has aspects of a world that we could still be in. Because I think, like in the Lusitania or Mauritania, you can tell that it's rather dated, and there's things that were from an era that aren't really popular now, but the construction is unique to a much longer period that has lasted.
Yeah, I like that. In terms of like the kind of architecture, for me, the one room that always stands out is the sea deck aft grand staircase reception room, the kind of restaurant reception area, because it's got like white walls, cream kind of walls, but then the staircase itself looks like the forward grand staircase. I just think it's a really nice room. I think it's really just looks really warm and kind of sweet and inviting. I wouldn't mind waiting there for a table in the restaurant with like a cocktail. So yeah, I like that answer. I like in terms of the look of the ships. Callum, what about you? Why do you think it's still sticking around?
Well, I'd say it's so accessible. Regardless of what kind of media you consume, you were talking about it at the start about how, you're not necessarily a reader, but you consume all types of other media, documentaries, etc. You've got all kinds of things constantly coming out. We've discussed books. The amount of Channel 5 documentaries that are released. They honestly, I've got a list of them here. Can I read out the list?
Please do. And I think it was Sebastian that was laughing because Channel 5 is...
It's the fifth
Channel
circle
5
of
can be
hell.
wild and crazy.
They have a reputation, let me just say.
Yes,
that.
it's the fifth circle of hell. In terms of the documentaries, this is just a little list I compiled when I was getting angry this morning about it. Top 10 mistakes that sank the Titanic 2019. Inside the Titanic 2012. How they built the Titanic 2019. Titanic draining the wreck 2017. Tony Robinson's History of Britain 2022. That's coming out soon, I think. And Titanic Conspiracy, the true story. I think that's some switch theory bullshit. But it's just like within the last kind of 5 years, they must be pretty much releasing a documentary every year. And it just keeps it alive in people's memories, doesn't it? And they think after they've watched a Channel 5 documentary that they're an expert and that they can tell you all kinds of things that have got to be true because it was on the telly.
That's very true, and especially when you kind of lay it out in such a brilliant way. It's constant. It's almost, and I mean this in a, don't know. It's like it's inescapable. Even if someone doesn't want to give a crap about the Titanic, they've almost got no choice.
Channel 5 will make sure you know about it.
Yeah, because even if it's only every middle of April, someone who's just going about their life, doing their thing, living their best non-Titanic life, it'll come to the middle of April and they'll either be gripped to the screen because the Titanic might not have been the Titanic, or because Leonardo DiCaprio has just died again. Like, it will be one of those two things, and then they'll spend the next few days thinking, how sad was that really happened and that all those people died. And then come May, they won't care again. And then the cycle continues, it repeats. And that's good because it keeps the story alive. But, then you need to kind of think, well, do we need this much Titanic content? Should we only really have like good stuff? Are we going to start gatekeeping documentaries now? Which that doesn't happen, let's be real. Like, there's no such thing as gatekeeping documentaries because Channel 5 wouldn't have a business model. They wouldn't be able to continue. So...
Right, boys, welcome to about Titanic. How about a new theory about the rivets made out of metal that's not...
Yeah, rivets made out of like paper or something. Like, there was an iron shortage in 1912, so they thought paper will do.
So they went with the Type 3 steel instead of the Type 4 or something like that. It's just like, oh, come on.
Yeah, there'll always be something. So that's a very good point, Callum. Very good point and very well illustrated. So thank you so much for that.
I need a breather now.
You've earned it. Presley, why do you think, even if it's kind of the same theme as the kind of previous comments, but why do you think it's still kind of lasting?
Yeah, I think that much like World War II, everyone has an opinion or knows something about the Titanic. But also, it was a time where there was like lots of firsts happening. You could see the end of Edwardian fashion, and it's like the first, worldwide reported event. And yeah, I think it was just an interesting time, and I think that's romanticized.
Yeah, and you've kind of touched on something that I also wanted to discuss after this section, the kind of romanticization of it as well, which is interesting. So I'm curious to kind of get back to you and kind of hear your thoughts on that, because it's an interesting one, but definitely, and I think Jack Thayer kind of put it very well when he said that the sinking of the Titanic kind of marked the end of that era of time, and the world after it. Obviously he was kind of had hindsight by that point, because he wrote and released that. I want to say it was in the 40s, but I'm not sure. But I know it was quite a long time after the sinking of the Titanic. He wrote and released a book for close friends and family to kind of read, but then obviously it was published and released, and but he just kind of wanted close people to know and then to never talk about it again. But he basically said that the world of today kind of woke with a shock on April 15th, 1912. And I think he was right. I think definitely this sense of security that the world had just was completely shaken.
I mean,
Um,
it's even like you see that in terms of Downton Abbey opening literally on the event that is sort of marked as the end of the Gilded Era, the end of the Gilded Age, moving the world rattling toward World War One and so on. Like it's drama. It's pure drama.
Yeah.
well, you were next, Chandler, so continue.
Oh, was I? Oh, wow, Presley,
yeah.
I loved what you had
Magic
to say.
voice.
I think it's interesting because, like, I suppose I approach it from the human perspective. I mean, being an actor and a writer, I'm very, very, very invested in what people bring to the equation. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the Titanic is just one of countless ships that were built and sailed and sank or didn't sink or anything. Like the Titanic was just a ship, really. And I think we'd mentioned it last week, where it's like, if it hadn't sank, it wouldn't have necessarily had a massively memorable career in comparison to other ships of its day. But I think for me, I look at it from the human perspective of people left this event and immediately started romanticizing it for themselves. They immediately started hyperbolizing it and exaggerating events and shifting their memory of what was or what wasn't based on what other people had told them, even if it was things they didn't see. And because, I mean, the New York Times, so I love this fact about the New York Times. The New York Times became how we know it as the New York Times because they were the first media source to accurately report that the Titanic had sunk, that it hadn't, that it wasn't going to be pulled into Halifax or anything. Like, we get immediately the New York Times saying, no, the ship, like communication ended at this time. We are going to print that it sank and that there's going to have been a fairly significant loss of life based on what we'd heard from Cape Race and so on. So it does sort of, as Presley was saying, mark this shift in terms of how news stories become global, and it's a shift in terms of how people perceive the world around them. I mean, it's one of the first things, and again, Presley, I'm literally taking this right from you. Jump in
You're
if you
fine.
want to, about how everyone has an opinion on it. And it's one of the first things that I think everyone globally would have had an opinion on. I mean, we can see implications in the entire, like, all around the world. China is obsessed with the Titanic. They're building a Titanic. Like, it's everywhere. It's not just one place. So I think that it persists because I mean, the sinking is pure drama. I said it last week. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's the length of a play. And you drop people into a situation where they have long enough to change their behaviors over the course of the period of time, going from disbelief to shock to action, or going straight for a lifeboat, or choosing to stay and not do anything but to help people. You get so many reactions, and I don't think we'll ever know all of them. And that, I think, inside of the fact that we get to sit and read about what people did, there's also that mystery of being like, well, I know according to so and so that this person was probably roughly in this place at this time, but again, I don't actually know that to be true. It may have been a romanticizing the fact that this person, I mean, what was it? There's the debate about John Jacob Astor smoking a cigarette with his dog on the deck. But we don't know that to be sure. We assume we do based on eyewitness accounts. But again, you never actually know. So it's this, I don't know, I look at it from the mystery and the drama and the human element. Like, if a ship sinks and nobody dies or nobody's affected by it, nobody really is going to remember the ship at all. They're just going to be like, oh, that was an event. Like, so many people who were on Titanic had already been shipwrecked before, but we don't know those shipwrecks. We just know this one. So that's my thought process.
Very true, and especially like the thing you said, it was the kind of the biggest event of that time and before that everyone had an opinion on.
Yeah, I mean,
Whether it was
Presley
just
said that. I just ran with it because I agree.
oh yeah, completely. I mean, these are both. I mean, these are all right. Because even we could come up with 100 reasons each why we think it's still so omnipresent, and there would still be like a million more. But yeah, it's very true. Very, very true. Even if whether that opinion went from, oh, how sad, to the captain was a drunk,
Yeah.
which isn't true. And actually, I'm reading Honesty of Glass, and there was a whole section based in the a la carte restaurant where multiple people, whether it was because they were probed, whether it was because they felt they had to say it, or whether they just said it because they were recounting events, but multiple people said that Captain Smith had like one sip of brandy or something, or whiskey, and that was it. That he wasn't refusing to drink, and he wasn't being forced. He just he had a sip and that was it. He didn't and also he wasn't like sailing at the time. He was kind of off duty, so it's irrelevant. He could have been like paralytic. He could have been like me in Dublin the other day, and it wouldn't have actually made much of a difference. So
Mr. Murdoch, what the bloody hell is going on at this time of night?
exactly, he was off the clock. But
Well, I always like that. What is it? The
Oh, we need a Titanic parody with a drunk Smith. Just saying.
like Lightoller in the film where one of the passengers says to him, "Would you like a drink?" And he says, "No, I'm on duty, but later," or something like that. It's like
Yeah.
they took their job seriously. Yeah.
Oh yeah, a night to remember. Yeah.
So it's like, I'll not drink right now, but fucking just try and stop me in like half an hour. Like, so yeah, absolutely. And just I wasn't going to say it like because you were like on a roll, and I was like, great. But just when you said John Jacob Astor had a cigar with his dog, in my head, the dog also had a cigar.
Thank you. I was thinking exactly the same
Oh my
thing.
god, I went there as well, so I'm
And
glad
I
it
was
wasn't
thinking that
just
very
you.
famous painting of dogs playing poker, except they're all.
Little did
That
we
was
know,
actually
little did we
painted
know.
on the deck of the
That's my
Titanic. Did
next
you not
drawing.
know?
They're all wearing life jackets and the room's tilting at like 10 degrees. That's
The thing
my
about the
next
That's
religious
drawing.
splashed my
aspect is
drink.
like, what happened to the dogs? What's like dog heaven like with the Titanic dogs? And it's just like this
Yeah, it's like,
table.
what
of
happened to the
poker.
dogs?
Yeah.
Only like one of them survived, but the rest, they got really drunk and they played poker and it was a good time. So, God love
Give it the
them.
brush, old man.
That can be the next theory, and we can be the ones to start it.
I'll call
Love it.
Channel 5.
So, yeah, Dean, why do you think we are still, in this day and age, in the year 2022, talking about the story of Titanic?
Wow, I think the story of Titanic itself has actually moved to almost like a myth status because it happened so long ago, and we have all of these books and these films about it and all these like crazy theories. And I feel like because it happened so long ago and we've had all of this media and exposure to this one event, because as I was saying earlier, like Chandler was saying earlier, like this was a big event that was kind of like the end of an era. But I believe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the interest in Titanic after the sinking sort of waned a little bit a few months later. I mean, obviously we had the film Saved from the Titanic. I think it was May 1912. But yeah, kind of obviously with the dawn of the First World War, it just no one was thinking about Titanic anymore, and that kind of disappeared. And I think the reason we still talk about it is because it's been kind of manipulated and romanticized so much to the point, I mean, I think even James Cameron says it in one of his many media things where he says it's a great novel written for us by history. And yeah, I just feel like we're so invested in it because it's this hyped up thing. You have this big ship, you have so many people, there's not enough lifeboats, third class were trapped below decks, and all of that. And I think it's the drama of it. Again, as Chandler said, it was pure drama, and I think that's why people are so invested in it, because of the dramatic tales in films and books that we've read. But I mean, if you look at something like, for example, the Costa Concordia, which happened 10 years ago now, because we were all there and we sort of witnessed it through the videos and things, no one really talks about that anymore. And obviously, there wasn't as much loss of life as the Titanic, but it was still this big event. And obviously then people likened it to the Titanic. But things like that, you don't really talk about it anymore. And the same for the Lusitania as well. Lusitania was a horrific disaster. It sinks in 18 minutes. Most of the people die. But I feel like that doesn't get as much interest because that happened during the war. So it was a part of all of the tragedy of the war. While Titanic was just this kind of unique bubble, there wasn't really any kind of major world events going on. And I think it's just kind of that myth status that is the reason everyone's still invested in it and wants to know more about it, because it's...
No.
Do you know what I
not at
mean?
all.
I feel like I'm
You're
rambling now.
spot on. I think a huge part of it is, the fact that it happened in a time of peace, that, there was no war, there's so much drama and speculation, and you brought up a really good point about the fact that people on the Costa Concordia and even just around it could film it.
Yeah.
Channel 5, I'm sure it was, or Channel 4, it was one of them. They probably they
Yeah.
did.
Channel
To be
5.
fair, it was fantastic. It was really well done. It was a documentary about I think it was the Boxing Day tsunami, or one
In
of the tsunamis.
2004.
It was a tsunami, but they made it entirely with mobile phone footage. So not a single bit was like, obviously 'cause there weren't like camera crews waiting for it to happen, but it was all just footage that people had filmed themselves, and it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever watched, because it's real. And but if Titanic had sank in 1912 and people had mobile phones and had filmed it all, it wouldn't be what it is today, because there would be no questions, there would be no speculation, there'd be no, that tsunami killed more people than Titanic, I'm sure, and it was way more devastating. But I can't even tell you what tsunami it was, because we know about it, and if I want to know about it, I can Google it and I can find out everything I need to know. I mean, even the death toll of Titanic wasn't certain until fairly recently. Although, to be fair, with something like a natural disaster, it's probably more uncertain. But I just think it was a really good point you brought up, Dean, about the mobile phones and the fact that people can film disasters now. And a huge part of the allure of Titanic is the uncertainty and the drama. The people locked below decks, but then actually, were they locked below decks? We don't know, because there was no CCTV, there was no one filming them, so we'll never know. So no, completely, yeah, you're spot on. Sebastian, what's your thoughts and opinions?
Did we have David? Or... Oh well,
Sorry.
I guess share my thoughts. It's just I saw a name between me and Dean, so it's like, did we skip someone?
Oh, on my screen it's Dean, then you.
Oh, right. That's... Yeah, I was just writing down some notes because being the last one, I was going to make sure I wasn't going to hit by a sudden case of amnesia. But it's just like a few. And one of the first ones, like, I noticed Chad was talking like if the Titanic didn't sink, and for some reason I got that episode of Supernatural in my head where they mix the Titanic sinking into it, and this angel is being put on a mission to make sure it doesn't sink, so they create all these new souls. And as a result, the main characters don't know what Titanic is. It's like, and then it's talking about Celine Dion. It's like, who's Celine Dion? Oh, she's some secondhand singer in Quebec, and let it stay that way. I just thought that was a little funny thing. Because without it, I don't think, without the sinking, like we said, and it's just repeating the other point, is that Titanic wouldn't have been the ship it's known as. But there was also some points from the Sea of Glass streams that I want to put in, because I think it was Ken Marshall that said it's like, for some people it's like a hobby. It's like, fixing your bike up every weekend, or for me, train spotting and stuff. And for some people it's a hobby, it's something to be excited about. And there's also like, it's a lot of firsts in that case, because someone mentioned this, it's the first sort of widely spread catastrophe covered in media. But another thing I learned, and I don't know how much of it is true, but it was also one of the first cases where the whole process of identifying bodies and getting in touch with the loved ones was sort of organized and created. Because I found this fascinating documentary about it, where they went through the whole process and where there was even the story of this little 3-year-old who's still unknown to this date, but that the crew salvaging these bodies, they spent all the money they got from the Astor family when they found his body to sort of pay for a proper funeral for this little unknown child. Um, so that's another thing, and one of the things they talked about was, because we also mentioned Lusitania and stuff like that. It's like it's like a neutral playground. I wrote in my notes, because everyone can come in with like their idea or their theory or their interest in the whole sinking, and there's no real political background. While as with Lusitania, you have all this World War One stuff going on, sort of thing. So there might be some different opinions of what did the Germans do wrong, what did the Americans, yada yada, sort of thing. But Titanic really isn't that sort of thing, because it's right in between some major events and stuff. But yeah, also an end of an era, but that's already been touched upon. And there's always something new. They also mentioned that in the Sea of Glass stream, it's like we always learn something new, a new witness account that just surfaced, and then that describes the sinking differently. So you don't have like this fixed picture, like we said with the cell phones, where you just it's documented right there. There's no doubt about what happened. While with Titanic, we always has new stuff, new theories, new things coming forward.
That's it, and
Yeah.
there will always be firsts coming out, and even things that we thought we kind of knew, or there was it was a first, and then in 5 years it might be like, oh, retract, we'll take that back. Turns out that was not quite accurate, and that will probably always happen. Really good point you mentioned, just about the fact that some people see it like a hobby. No, I completely see it like a hobby. It's my biggest hobby, because drawing is my hobby, but then my hobby is also Titanic. So it's like the two things. And my partner, he's into like classic and vintage cars, and he goes to car shows. He's got two kind of classic cars. He's really into all that. I if it's got four wheels and it goes vroom, I guess it's a car. That's like the extent of my knowledge. But it's really interesting because he's also part of lots of online groups, and the drama. Oh, I mean, the Titanic community probably has more drama. And to be fair, I've like told him some of it, and he's like, "Wow." But
Railways are no different. Like if you're talking livery, that is the paint scheme of an engine. Oh, that's spicy.
it's just really interesting because the kind of the depth that people go into, and the commitment, and the kind of the not really knowing why someone became so obsessed with classic cars or vintage cars. It's really interesting because they're two completely different things, but we can both see why we care about it so much. We might not be able to vocalize it, but we can see we're both very passionate about these two things. And if there was a Titanic convention in town, I would go. If there was a classic car show in town,
same thing here.
He would go. So it's very true. And for some people, they would maybe see calling it a hobby as being insulting. So you could call it like a passion, an interest. You're an enthusiast, because I maybe wouldn't call myself a hobbyist, but to be fair, I'm not saying it from an offensive place, so I can completely see that point of it being like a hobby, because I think
we're hobby historians.
Yeah, exactly. So no, yeah, completely great point to bring up. And last but certainly not least, David. So what's your kind of thoughts? Again, even if we've kind of like eaten up all the talking points, anything you just kind of want to say?
Yeah, I so dreaded being lost because of that. But
I'll make sure, David. I'll make sure next time you are first.
Oh, I don't know if that's any better. I kind of just wanted to emphasize, I guess, what Chan was saying. for me anyway, the most interesting part is the people aspect, definitely. And it's just sort of, well, the main reason it's romanticized, I think, would be 97 Cameron, just because it was so accessible to everyone. It swept awards and it was like nothing anyone's ever seen before. But within that, there were so many like interesting stories about people. And then when you dive further into it, it's just this, it's an everyday group of people. Third class, you have your immigrants starting a new life. In first class, you just have people on holiday, and they're all united by extreme circumstances that no one would ever experience in their life. And you look at all the individual stories, and there's around 2,200 of them. Each of them have something really interesting. You have your engineers staying behind to keep the lights on. You have just people being separated. There's just so much weird human aspect to it. That's the bit that fascinates me the most. There's a lot of other elements as well, but for me, that would be it. It's the idea that you can put yourself as well in those shoes. It's the idea that you can be like, oh, what would I have done? When I was a child, I was like, oh, I just would have survived because I'm a child, and now I'm an adult. It's a more scary thing to think of, So I think that would be my sort of angle towards why.
It's do you know, it's so true. It's a statistic that's kind of stuck with me for the last. I can't remember when I last saw it. I want to say, because when it comes to like data, there's people out there that will have known all the data talking points for like their whole life, and like love that for you. Live your best statistic life. But
you do you, boo.
Yeah, you do you, boo, and I'll do me way over here. But it was that 50% of the children on Titanic died.
Yeah.
So literally, and obviously there was one first class child died, but for all the rest, literally, if you lined up every second and third class child, there was a 50% chance you were going to die that morning, which I just think is really hard. Like, even talking about it now, I'm like, because I work in like a school with kids, and I'm just like,
Me too.
Yeah.
not to say that, because I know lots of adults, and I'm not saying that it makes it easier, but it kind of does, because kids, it's just it's awful,
It's a different
horrible.
feel you have
So
around kids.
yeah, it's really fun.
It's
I didn't realize.
I
Yeah,
I didn't
I
realize
didn't
the
know that.
statistic was that
I
high
want
for
to correct it
children.
a
I'm
little
actually
bit.
shocked at
Every
that.
single child in second class actually survived.
I was
So
going to say that. Thank you.
the majority of that statistic is skewed by third class children.
So it was third class, so 50%. So there you go. So
That makes
there was
sense.
the one first class child died, and then so yeah, if you were a child on Titanic, third class, you had like a 0.5% chance you're going to live, 0.5% chance you're going to die, which is just, I couldn't believe it, and I thought that can't be true.
No, but I think that largely comes from, because like a lot of times it was about families choosing to stay together rather than lack of opportunity to send children away in a number of cases. Like the family, I forget which family their name is, but they've got the photo of all of them and an infant who's not included in the photo. And the entire
Goodwins?
family died because they didn't want to separate any of them. Like they chose not to separate themselves. So I think it's a horrible statistic, and yet at the same time it comes down to the social realization. It's the same reason Lorraine Allison stayed with her mother, because they were looking for her brother who was already off in a lifeboat. So it's refusing to leave your family or refusing to be separated from your family that resulted in a lot of the deaths, I'd say.
Oh no, of course. There weren't officers, looking at the kids going, "Nah, if I'm not getting off, you're staying." But it's really harrowing, because, like David said, you would think when you were young, you'd be like, "Oh, well, I mean, I'd have survived, but what about my dad? What about my big brother?" Like, but then actually, depending on your family dynamic and your social standing, back then, I'd have definitely been third class. I probably wouldn't have been able to afford a
100%.
third class ticket. So as adults, we can kind of look back and with more context, more understanding, and say, well, actually, my parents wouldn't have wanted me out of their sight. My parents would have wanted me to kind of stay within their, vision. And that's all well and good, but then, you know, it's just really so that for me that was like a huge wake up call because it was something I didn't know, and that was maybe only 2 years ago, and there's reasons for it, and it, but it just kind of showed me that there's always something to either learn or there's something to kind of solidify about it, and that's for someone, I'm only 27, I'll be 28 in a couple months, but I don't know even like the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended. Like there's so much to learn, there's so much to really like sink my teeth into, and yeah, I think all of you have put it like brilliantly, in terms of why it's still so kind of resonant, and I do think a huge part of it is kind of putting yourself in the shoes of those people, even just touching on it there and saying, well, what would my family have done in that position? Would my mum or my dad have put me on a lifeboat and then, went off to do whatever they could? Or, it's harrowing. It's pretty harrowing, I think, when you think about it sometimes, but it's also fascinating and gripping and dramatic and all these kind of words that we've kind of mentioned. One thing that really bothers me, and I see it online, is when people, they kind of like refer to the ship in like a sentient way, and they don't kind of talk about the people. They kind of talk about the ship, and I don't just mean when they say like she, because obviously that's just how you refer to.
Yeah, that's right, refers to ships. But I think I get what you're getting at.
So that's fine, saying she, that's standard. But it's when they talk about like, they almost give it life, but they're not referring to the people. They're talking about like the ship. I even had someone send me a poem that they'd written, and it was written from the perspective of Titanic, as if she was alive. And don't get me wrong, like I see the sentiment of what they're doing. I get it, I do get it, but I'm like, I don't want people to just be like, oh, she was such a beautiful ship, she was so pretty, her architecture was great, and that's what was lost. Because it's like, well, no, we could build, I can't remember exactly who mentioned it, but we're building one in China. Was it Chandler, I think?
Yeah.
I think they're almost complete with it, actually.
Yeah, so it's like, we're building another Titanic. We can do it.
It's
whenever.
It's going to be like a hotel resort thing.
Yeah. But it's like, we can't bring back the like 1,496 people. Like, that's not, and like, even just saying that number out loud, that's a huge bloody number. That's massive. So for people to have read the headlines being like, oh, the ship's fine, very good, and then for them to read just how many people had actually died, no wonder it's stuck. Like, that's shocking. It's a shocking amount of people to have lost their lives in anything, let alone a ship that was just meant to be taking people over to America. Like, it's, so even just me sitting here kind of thinking out loud and talking about kind of what we've discussed, I'm still shocked by it. I do think it's just shocking, and I think for me, what got me into it, or I think what kind of froze me in that permanent state of obsession, was the shockingness of it. That it wasn't just a ship, it was a brand new ship. And it wasn't just a brand new ship, it was the biggest and, most technologically advanced and supposedly safest ship. It was a perfect storm of not only the iceberg and the ship, but of the heightened kind of atmosphere around it. That obviously when the inevitable happened, it was just all the more shocking. That's the only word I can think to kind of describe it. But it's created some amazing art. It's created some amazing films, and like we said earlier, it's created some incredible real-time live streams.
It's created this podcast.
And that is truly the best.
That was actually the best point.
Brought us all together.
Presley, you're right. It has created this podcast.
How didn't you think of that, Aaron? Jesus.
I know.
It's bad branding, It's just...
Bad branding. I don't know. I don't actually. Who listens to podcasts here? Like, curious.
Plenty, all the time. It's all I listen to in the gym.
Once in a while, I gotta say.
I actually don't. I just don't. Although I did listen to my other halves the other day
Of course
because
you
he's just created one. So, but yeah, I generally don't listen to that unless there's like a specific
Same.
topic where I'm like,
Like
that
all
looks
those
interesting.
YouTubers making podcasts. I haven't listened to a single of them, but there's like a podcast about one of my favorite bands, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
where they
I
dive into the
listen
songs
to
and the compositions.
true crime. Like my idea of unwinding. So when I'm done being shocked and harassed by Titanic statistics, my go-to relaxation is true crime and murder podcasts.
Easy
Uh,
listening.
Yeah, 100%.
They're so fun.
There's some pretty
I'm
awesome
seeing
ones
them,
of those,
yeah.
to be
But
fair.
there's some fascinating ones. One of them I listen to is, I think it's called Trace Evidence. That's very good. True crime is just it's a huge thing. So my life, it's like a mixture of Titanic and true crime. But and well, I suppose if you believe in the switch theory,
TNT.
Titanic is also true crime.
Oh god.
Triggered.
Well,
Yeah, so
sorry.
oh no,
I just
press
wanted
it.
to kind of piggyback on that. You guys are, it's almost like Titanic has reached this myth status. What I think is kind of, crazy is they've always said, Titanic's going to be gone in 20 years or however long it's going to take. One day it will be gone. And what will exist is, people like us, podcasts, the media, the stories, and the people's stories. And I think that that's crazy.
I think it was the Sea of Glass. I keep mentioning them, but they have some very good points. And one of them was like, the historians carry on the torch in a way, because it's the story that lives on as long as it's being told, portrayed, that sort of thing, that it lives on. Even a podcast like this.
Yeah, like what better way to kind of honor people's memory and to keep their stories, their individual stories alive, than kind of talking about them and keeping them alive.
That's so true, and that's really, I don't get very like mushy very often, but no, I do. I think that's a very really poignant point to make. That I don't think I'll ever have kids, but if I did one day, just try and stop me telling them about Titanic. In fact, my friend, when I was on holiday this weekend, she did say, she was like, "You do know that if you ever have kids, they're also going to become obsessed in Titanic." And I was like, if I've done my job right, then yes, they will. Like, that's the dream, that I'll have two mini Aarons, or however many going out into the world, drawing Titanic from the age of 6, and people being like, "Oh, what's that?" And then being like, "Let me tell you."
Wait, where are your bedtime stories? Oh, so yeah, but that's nice to remember. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's the real Titanic legacy.
that'd be
It's like, can I have a bedtime story? Sure, brings out Walter Lord.
Walter Lord. I saw.
I think actually, funnily enough, talking about bedtime stories, I remember in primary school, we obviously, you probably all had to have your reading books, and you'd have to write down like what page you're on and all that stuff. And I remember, I think I was in year 2, so I must have been about. I can't even remember how old you were at those days. But we got to bring in our. We actually got to choose a Titanic, a book that we wanted to read to bring in. So I brought in a Titanic book, but it wasn't a storybook. It was I can't even remember what the author's name was, but it was the Titanic book with black bands at the top and bottom. It's just called Titanic, and there's a painting of it sinking in the middle. That's the front cover. And that's what I took in as my reading book. And I was sat there, and it was like, the Titanic was built in Belfast. It was made of this and this and this. And bear in mind, I must have been about like 8 or 9, and I brought in this big book. And my teacher even said, "I think this is a bit too advanced. Can you choose something else?" And I think that just kind of goes to show, like I think that just kind of goes to show just how like big and impactful this, that Titanic is. The fact that us, all of us, the fact that we're such a young age bringing in these books or talking about such an advanced topic, to be fair, it just kind of goes to show just the impact that the Titanic has on people. And I think as well, kind of like referring back a little bit to the last episode, I think that's also why there are so many strong opinions and like people kind of arguing with each other, because it's such a big passion that we all love.
People can be very protective about their passions. I know, because people attack me in my trams,
exactly.
And I'm like, you bitch, shut the.
I think I don't know. I wish my brother was on this. I want to get him on one day because I really want to, because he knows like nothing about Titanic, or he only knows what I've told him, or the lies he's been fed from James Cameron. I'm just joking, but and if he was here, because he's got a degree in psychology, he'd be like, yep, checks out, makes sense. But when I was in first year or second year, we had to do a talk on something that we were passionate about, and I was like, Kylie Minogue, obviously, no, not really, Titanic. So it was
You
Titanic.
had me fooled there, and you had me fooled.
Although looking back, I wish I had done Kylie, because at least they'd have known. But and
you can't get her out of your head.
I'm traumatized by this. Like, even just like starting to talk about this, I'm like starting to sweat. It's horrible. But
Did you go through?
I was nervous enough as it was. I was up getting in front of my class, and I was not, believe it or not, I was not a cool kid. I was actually like, quite bullied. Like I just was not popular, but I wasn't like loathed. Like people, they kind of saw that was like quite funny. I was harmless, but I was also a victim. I was like a target. It was a weird combination, and it has left me like, yeah. But I got up and I was like, Titanic, that's my talk. So I spoke about it, and even at that age of like 11, 12, I knew some things that people wouldn't know, or things that kind of needed corrected. And I thought it was a really good talk. I think I did well. I kind of got into my rhythm and I got confident, and then done. And the kind of end of it was, any questions. And this one guy just put up his hand. He went, "Aye, what was your talk even about?" And I just kind of stood there and I was like, I didn't even know what to say. I was just like, was it not fucking obvious? Like, the Titanic. Like, what? And then because he had kind of set the tone, like, I could tell there were people that were, like, interested in it. But then because he said that, everyone else just kind of shut down. And I was like, oh. And I just kind of, like, took my seat. And my teacher was like, you did really well, Adam. Well done. It's a pass. But it was just really jarring because I was like, what the hell? Like, and so I don't know if I've like carried that forward where I'm like, I need people to know that I know what I'm talking about, and I need people to care. And I think one of the things that I really like about really getting involved in the online aspect of it is that people do care. Like people really care. And like people know their stuff. And so I've really enjoyed, kind of diving into the online aspect of it. Yes, it can be a bit wild at times, but that just makes it all the more interesting. So yeah, but I didn't, because like I said earlier, I don't read. I didn't bring any Titanic books into, but there was one. I want to say it was like Margaret Brady. I don't know if that was the name of the author or like the character, but it was like a fictional, kind of like Titanic story. I've seen it shared on a couple of the Facebook groups, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that, because I kind of picked it up and read the first few pages. But then I think when I realised it wasn't based on a true person, because I was at that point where I really wanted to absorb all the real material, obviously mostly online, that I could. So when I saw it was fake, because I was young, I was like, no, not interested.
Next.
Yeah, thank you, next. But, I very much like the idea of reading Walter Lord to children. Just a night to remember. Here we go. This a classic. You'll enjoy this.
Well, I mean, what was it? I think the first book I ever received was a children's book, Polo the Titanic Bear, written by a Titanic survivor. Like, there are some really, really, really good books for kids. And I mean, Walter Lord is fantastic and so on. But I think there's maybe some nuance there that would be lost on
It's a bit
children
heavy.
potentially. But like there's books like My Titanic Alphabet, teaching kids the like letters of the alphabet with the Titanic. A is for I don't know, something, but like R is for rivet, or I is for iceberg, or T is for Titanic, and so on. Like, and like there are so many. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I have a few of those in the garage. I have some kids ones. I think is it called Dorling Kindersley? Those range of books like aimed for kids. There's they have some great ones. I think there's one called the Story of Titanic, which has amazing cross sections in it, and there's this other little book. I think it was only about like maybe like an A5 size book that my dad got me when I was young, and that like had kind of the brief outline of the voyage, and then it had loads of stuff about the wreck at the end of it. It was probably only about 40 pages long. It wasn't long at all. But yeah, it had loads of really cool information. I think I remember taking that into school at one point to read it as well. And the book I was talking about before, actually, is Titanic by Leo Marriott. That was the book I took into school as a little kid, and my teacher said it was
I
too
remember
advanced
that. That
for
was a
me.
big
So.
hardback, black covered book. The Titanic font
It was
like kind of silver with like rivets.
That's the one.
Yeah, or like white with rivets.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and I imagine me at like 7 years old lugging that into school.
That's hilarious. I love that so much. That is so cute. I mean, for the book that I'm kind of working on, I knew that people who were of a certain caliber of Titanic expert or Titanic enthusiast wouldn't, they might appreciate my drawings, but that wouldn't be the selling point. So I'm like, there's no point trying to cater to that crowd because that's just not going to happen. And I wouldn't anyway. But then I'm like, I want it to be slightly more informed and detailed than kind of like primary age, kind of we're past the Titanic Alphabet, but we're not quite at Leo Marriott. So I'm like somewhere between those two. But I'm quite happy with that now because I'm like, actually, that still means that I can put in quite a lot of information, but I don't need to feel like I'm rewriting like on a sea of glass. So
yeah, you don't need to like make an academic paper or something. It's just like hitting the right demographic, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Because I kind of just I like this, especially nowadays. It's very simplistic actually to self-publish something. And I like the idea that people that are really passionate about something and are creative, that they can do that. They can just release whatever, even if it's not a book, even if it's art, or if it's a digital model, or a podcast, or a poem or a song they've written. Again, that person sent me their poem, and whilst I didn't want to like broadcast it on my platforms, I could appreciate that they had clearly sat and spent time writing that, and that's their creative outlet. Fan fiction, as we know.
Daddy.
Yeah, that's a whole thing.
I had to drop it. Louis not here. I had to drop it.
I know.
Daddy.
I'm not gonna lie. I was watching James Cameron's Titanic the other day while I was at work, and
just you look at this actor and you're like, no, can't do this.
No, I think you'll find can do this. Absolutely.
Oh, no.
I love the fact you were just watching Titanic 1997 at work. Like,
well, I work from home, so I can literally do whatever I like.
Brilliant.
It's great.
That's so good.
Yeah, just pop it on. I even told work, I was like, so it's the anniversary. I'm watching this. Nobody talk to me. I know I'm management as well, so responsibility.
Do not engage. That's hilarious. That's so
Please
funny.
edit that out.
Yeah. Well, to kind of wrap up, I guess I just would like to hear, I don't know, kind of like very, because we had kind of said we were going to talk about what we think we would do, but I think it's really hard to think about that. But just a kind of group discussion, so just kind of, if you can think of something, let me know. But if we had been there, and I had kind of said, thinking about our parents or us when we were kids or whatever, what would they have done? But as adults now, if we were on the Titanic as the age that we currently are, do we know what we would have done? Would we have done anything differently than all those other people did? I'd just be like curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I find that an interesting topic because I think we're all sat here thinking, I would be, I'd be really heroic. I would do this, but knowing me as I am now, I would probably be somewhere in the corner having a full-on panic attack. I'd be like, if I was with my other half, I would probably just do everything I possibly could to get up to those lifeboats. It would be frantic. I would be freaking out, and Yeah, I'd like to think I'd try and be heroic, but I just know it would be blind panic trying to
Honestly, yeah.
get up those stairs, get to that lifeboat.
I mean,
For some,
I think there's
get
always
us-
the
get us
question
off.
is, if you're in that situation, do we have the knowledge we have today? Because obviously, like if you've got the knowledge you have today, you're going to say, okay, I'll go get into lifeboat number 7. There are plenty of men who got into that lifeboat. Or
Yeah, I'll just go to the side where
number
Merle
5.
is in charge.
Like,
Avoid
'cause the
Lightoller.
first well, I mean, I was just thinking because the
I
first
would
few boats
say,
to go
just
away
because
had
yeah, it's a
men
good
in.
clarifying question. So just to clarify, let's say we don't have the knowledge we have today, but let's say you overheard from a gentleman on the boat deck or in the smoking room, and he overheard from Thomas Andrews that, yeah, the ship's going to sink. You don't know how long, and, there's whispers of a ship kind of on the horizon, but the ship's definitely going down, and obviously, that there's not enough lifeboats for people. So that's the kind of scenario.
That's really hard to say because of how different the circumstance is from person to person. Like you'd
Yeah,
have to
it's like there's
answer.
a big difference if you're like third, second,
You have to, yeah, exactly.
first.
You have to answer what class you're in. You
Yeah.
have to answer what room you're in when it happens. You have to answer who you're with and all that.
I might suggest something with this one because I would be intrigued, but I'd be really intrigued if people like went away, did a bit of research about like, so if I was there today, I'd probably be in this class. I can roughly assume this is where my cabin might have been. Go away, come back with like your game plan in the moment. I'd be fascinated by that. Like what story would
Yeah.
you have? Because we can
I'd be in my
assume,
cabin.
but until I sit there and I'm like, oh no, I would have been in that cabin right there, probably, maybe, or that. Or is it men in the bow, women and family in third class in the stern? Like where out in the ship are you? When do you know about the accident itself? When do you know that something's happening? Like because different people found out at different times and different people reacted to it in different moments. Again, what was it? Lawrence Beasley didn't know till he was tripped on the stairs. What was it? Fifth was it the fifth officer who was on the stern and then saw a lifeboat in the water, called up to the
Yeah.
bridge and was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Are you aware there's a boat adrift? We're sinking, Conrider.
Yeah. One thing I thought was really interesting that I heard was that there was kind of just before the final plunge, there was this huge rush of third class people came up to the boat deck. But it was forward. So they had come up either the grand staircase or some other route, but they had emerged, and it might have been Gracie, possibly, that had mentioned that, because he was kind of near that little area. But then I was reading something, and it might have actually been in one of Paul Quinn's books, because there's definitely a photograph of the second class entrance or the second class like staircase that was like aft. I think it was that book, but basically it said, interestingly, the third class people could have easily accessed this staircase from, the third class areas of the ship. Second class, although you still technically couldn't go into it, it was much easier to get into second class areas than it was first class. And it was such a direct ascension up from the bowels of the ship to the boat deck. But yeah, just interestingly, they didn't. And I, in learning psychology at college, for like child development and stuff like that for teaching, we covered a lot on learned helplessness, which is this thing that if you come from deprivation or subservience, you're a maid, all your family have been maids or cleaners or whatever. None of you have ever had any money, so therefore you've never had agency or anything. And there were reports of this. There were reports of third class people literally with all their suitcases. They'd gone into their rooms, they'd packed all their stuff, or they just had it already kind of ready to go, whatever that was. And they're just sitting around in the kind of public rooms down in the bowels of the ship, or on stairwells, or the gates weren't locked, but they were just sitting around waiting. They were waiting for. They'd been told, get up, get your life belts on, and they were like, "Cool, done that. What now?" And they were waiting for someone to literally come and spell out for them. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean, they only did what they were told to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they had only been told to get up and put their life belts on, and that was
Yes.
it. And so they literally just waited around. And I'll find out, and I'll let you know. I'll send it in the group chat, or I'll mention it next time, the account. But it was just so, that this person was very like, I'm getting out of here. You can do what you want. But these people just sat in groups in families and just waited for someone to come and tell them exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
there was that assumption as well, wasn't it? Like the lifeboats were for first class, so and because obviously with the class systems in place, like everyone knew their class, and because they would have seen signs saying like third class passengers are not allowed past this point. So like if you look at the aft well deck on C deck, there was a door straight into the second class promenade, which took you into the second class stairs, which would have got them to the boat deck. But because there was a sign there that said third class are not allowed past this notice, they wouldn't go because they knew they weren't allowed to. And that's quite, I find
that you're in
that
an
really, really sad.
emergency, your alert systems don't kick in, so you don't go, right, I need to do everything to survive. I just but there's still rules.
Exactly. And if you don't know the ship's actually going to go down, then you're probably not. I feel like the men in the bow of the ship, if they could see that it was flooding pretty bad, but even then, they might still think, okay, it's flooding, not great, my socks are now soaked, but we'll be fine. The ship won't actually completely go down. And it probably wasn't until the final plunge that, they thought, shit, it's happening. But that, I just thought that was really sad. This idea of, just this lack of agency of just taking your own life in your own hands for that final hour or whatever. And it might not have made a difference. It might have. But yeah, I just think so. So Chandler, what you were saying is, that I would really like that actually. And people don't need to put in a lot of time into it. Just think, roughly with what I earn. If we're thinking like nowadays, what class would I be? Watch this like next week, or no, in like 2 weeks' time. We'll have someone come on and be like, I'd be like crew. I'd be crew or first class, so I'd be fine.
Fine. I'd be like one of the.
I'm actually the captain.
like whatever, like a stoker or something, like
a bellboy.
a bellboy. But no, that would be very interesting. Actually, that would be something quite interesting to do, because I don't know. I mean, even with the knowledge we have now, or with the kind of knowledge of it is going to sink, but you don't know how long. It's like, well, should I overreact? Should I go and gather like 10 mattresses and tie them together, or would that be seen as like a faux pas? Would that be a bit embarrassing? Like, it's like, what do I do, and when do I do it?
Should I collect all the life jackets and stuff it into the?
Yeah.
It's like one of the theories for that final word James Cameron thing is like they came out with a model which, according to all the calculations, if you took all the life jackets on Titanic and stuffed them into like the sort of gap into the hull of the ship, you actually would have Titanic being afloat long enough for rescue to come. But it's such a specific situation to describe. It's like, try to convey that to like 2,200 passengers. Can I have your life jacket, please, for this really mad idea that might not work?
I think it was Ken Marshall's idea, actually.
Was that Was that him or Lewis Abernathy? No, it wasn't. Lewis Abernathy was to go back to the iceberg.
Put people on the iceberg.
I know. Like, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was like, you're not going to be able to get people on lifeboats, but you think they're going to climb on a big chunk of ice? Really? Like, but even
we've
that,
never had an ice cube in our hands. It's sitting on a berg. No way.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So, and then plus, you'd have to fight all the penguins. There'd be quite a lot of penguins, maybe like a polar bear or two. You'd have to like, you got to shove them off to get some room. But Rose would be fine. She'd be like, bye, polar bear, punch. But But yeah, so do you know what? I'm looking forward to that for the next one. So we've touched on what we think we would do, but actually, I think it'd be really interesting for the next episode to pick up on where do we think we would be on the ship? You know, what class roughly do we think we would be? And what do we think we'd have done? You know, I can go through kind of one at a time, or it can just be like a group discussion. But I think that would be a really interesting kind of. It's almost like
It's like a really good assignment.
well, it's like almost like one of those books, like a choose your own adventure. Like you get a page and it's like, you know, are you first class, are you second class, or are you third class? And then you're like, I'm third class, and it's like turn to page 56. So you do, and then it's like,
because
Yeah.
that would be really fun to write.
Oh, that would actually be really good.
That would be so fun to write.